Gentlemen, welcome to the 5th World Reconstruction Conference. Today's agenda will commence with the opening ceremony, moderated by the head of Disaster Risk Reduction and Recovery for Building Resilience team in UNDP's Crisis Bureau, also the chair of the International Recovery Platform. Mr. Ronald Jackson, the stage is yours.
First, I would like to invite our distinguished delegates at the front to join me on the dais, starting with ASG Okai from UNDP. Please. Next, I would like to invite the Honorable Minister Effendi to also join us on the dais. SRSG, Mami, please, if you would join us as well. We also have joining us virtually Dr. Mishra, who is, I think, joining us from Delhi in India, if I'm not mistaken. And he might be somewhere on our screen, but you will see him shortly. Last but certainly not least, I would like to invite Director Waba from the World Bank to join us on the dais. Colleagues, before we get into the formal comments, I want to really take this opportunity to say how wonderful it is to see you outside of this box we've become accustomed to over the last 2 years. It's a great feeling to be greeting friends, greeting colleagues, and just to see the stakeholders in their numbers coming out again. We've suffered, I think, from this experience for the last 2 years. Now let me get to the formal matters on hand. The Honorable Minister Muhadir Effendi, Coordinating Minister of the Ministry of Human Development and Culture, Dr. Pramod Kumar Mishra, Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister of India, Ms. Mami Mizuturi, Special Representative of the United Nations Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction and Head of the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, Assistant Secretary General Asako Okai, Head of the UNDP's Crisis Bureau, Mr. Sami Waba, Director of the World Bank. Good day and welcome. I would also want to take this opportunity to extend a warm welcome to the delegates attending the 5th Reconstruction Conference, including our participants who are joining us online. Before welcoming the esteemed speakers to share brief messages, I would like to take just a brief minute to reflect on the genesis, on the journey of the World Reconstruction Conference. The first ever World Reconstruction Conference was convened some 11 years ago in Geneva with the aspiration of bringing together leaders, experts, policymakers, and practitioners from government, international organizations, NGOs, academia, and the private sector from both the developing world and the developed world. Traditionally, the World Reconstruction Conference was organized by 3 partners, the EU, the World Bank, and UNDP, in conjunction with the Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction. This year, I'm pleased that we are happy to have the International Recovery Platform on board. Over the next 2 days, we're aspiring to have a successful fifth event, and the World Reconstruction Conference continues to be a platform for sharing new tools, innovative approaches, such as the early editions of the Post-Disaster Needs Assessment and Disaster Recovery Framework guides, as well as it creates a space to increase the participation of the most vulnerable in recovery, as well as to provide policy recommendations for encouraging and strengthening innovative, resilient, and inclusive recovery for all our stakeholder groups who are hopefully represented here today. Today, I'm very pleased and honored to moderate this opening ceremony of the 5th World Reconstruction Forum, both as a representative of UNDP, as the co-chair of the International Recovery Platform, but also my voice over the next 2 days must also be the voice of the people, as must be yours, because those are the people we serve. With that, I would now like to introduce to you our esteemed speakers, starting first with Ms. Asako Okai, who officially began her role as UNDP's Assistant Administrator and Director for the Crisis Bureau on August 22, 2018. Ms. Okai has over 30 years of experience in the Japanese Foreign Service and the United Nations. She possesses an extensive track record in development, humanitarian response, disaster management, and peace-building work at both the strategic and operational levels, such as implementing innovative financial mechanisms to support reliable humanitarian funding models as Japan's Director of Humanitarian Assistance. She holds a Master of Arts in History of Art at Emmanuel College, Cambridge University, and a bachelor's degree in law from Hitotsubashi University, Japan. I hope I got that right. Please join me in welcoming ASG Okai to bring her opening remarks.
Thank you, Ron, for a kind introduction. Excellencies, distinguished guests, honored dear participants and delegates, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of co-organizers to the 5th World Reconstruction Conference. I am here today with my colleagues and friends, Ms. Mami Mizutori, Special Representative of the United Nations Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction, and Mr. Sami Wahaba, Global Director of the World Bank's Urban Disaster Risk Management, Resilience, and Land Global Practice, who will address this distinguished audience shortly. With thanks to our gracious host, the Government of Indonesia, we are gathered on the beautiful island of Bali, a striking backdrop for our discussions and distinct reminder of what can be achieved when policy prioritizes community, environment, and technology. We are privileged to welcome Honorable Muhaji Effendi, Coordinating Minister for Human Development and Cultural Affairs, representing the Government of Indonesia. We are also honored to hear from Dr. Paramoon Kumar Mishra online, Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister of India, who will share experience from the advances they have made in financing disaster risk reduction and recovery in their country. Thank you to all distinguished delegates of this conference for being with us today and for your commitment to this theme of recovery for a sustainable future. Your voices and perspectives will be essential to the progress we hope to make this week. Over the next 5 days, we'll examine the realities of a world transformed by the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll confront the changing nature of risk in an evolving landscape of interconnected disasters. Above all, we'll look to the futures as we define sustainability in these challenging times and chart a course for inclusive recovery and resilience. And while it is true that we are living through perhaps the most complex global crisis in modern history, we meet this moment with a unique sense of resolve and the profound experiences that comes with 2 years of unprecedented hardship. Today, our global pandemic continues to upend lives and livelihood. Climate change continues unabated. Destabilizing conflict persists unchecked. These events are reversing progress on human rights and human security, disrupting sustainable development, and exacerbating inequalities, particularly for women and girls. Now, more than ever, these connected challenges demand collective action. Lasting solutions will require new partnerships and coalitions. And so, recovery towards a sustainable future also means rethinking the way individuals, communities, and institutions work together. In many cases, the pandemic has exposed weaknesses in these relationships and in existing policy frameworks. In others, these challenges have revealed resilience, cooperation, and innovation from all corners of society. How then do we translate these diverse experiences into comprehensive policy positions and meaningful actions? For this fifth World Reconstruction Conference, our task is clear. We must first take stock of approaches, tools, and best practices to address the socio-economic effect of the ongoing pandemic. Second, preserve and advance progress on the SDGs through recommitment for a green, resilient, inclusive recovery. And third, propose more effective methods of resilience designed for the type of increasingly interconnected shocks we expect in the future. For UNDP, we also see this conference as a critical input to our long-standing commitment to resilience. We have decades of experience in recovery operations with an annual program portfolio of more than $1 billion for community-based resilience programs. For the owner-based reconstruction of more than 30,000 homes in post-2015 earthquake in Nepal, to the Sulawesi Lombok program for earthquake and tsunami infrastructure reconstruction assistance, PETRA, in both provinces in Indonesia, UNDP is deeply committed to building resilience in communities, systems, and institutions designed to prevent, mitigate, and recover from crises where they occur. During the conference, UNDP is ready to share our experiences and lessons learned from projects like this in more than 150 countries. And I ask you to do the same. As we set out on our agenda, let us commit to make the most of this unique opportunity for knowledge sharing. The World Reconstruction Conference can and must be a driver for the type of innovation and action our world so desperately needs. In the spirit of collaboration, I would like to acknowledge other UN partners organizations for their support in shaping key parallel sessions. I thank the United Nations Environment Programme, UN Women, the International Labour Organization, and the World Health Organization for their contribution to the conference. And so, I am honored to kick off the fifth World Reconstruction Conference with a commitment to listen, to learn, and to above all, to act. Let us go forward together. Thank you.
Thank you, ASG Okai. Our next speaker, Professor Dr. Muhajir Effendi, the coordinating minister for human development and culture. The minister previously served as Minister of Education and Culture from mid-2016 to 2019. Mr. Effendi has been the General Chair of the Muhammadiyah Central Executive from 2015 to 2020. He has received a service award, namely the Satayalakana Karya Satya 20 in 2010. In addition, Mr. Effendi is also actively writing a number of books, including Baladua, as a witness of young Dalan, Muhammadiyah, and education in Indonesia. I have to take a course in Indonesian language and culture. While he was serving as the Minister of Education and Culture, he was awarded the UNESCO Hamdan bin Rashid Al Maktoum for outstanding practice and performance in increasing the effectiveness of Indonesian teachers. He's very concerned about human empowerment and potential development. He has earned a bachelor's degree at Malang State University. He then took his postgraduate education at Gajah Mada University with a master in public administration in 1996. Then in 2008, Mr. Effendi successfully completed his third degree in military sociology at the Erlanga University doctoral program. In addition, he has also attended several courses abroad, including at the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. in 1993, and in Victoria University in British Columbia, Canada in 1991. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Minister to give his remarks.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to Bali, to Indonesia. I would like to introduce my book in Bahasa Indonesia. Yang saya hormati Ibu Asoka Okai, UNDP's Assistant Administrator and Director for the Crisis Bureau. Yang saya hormati Ibu Mami Misutori, Special Representative of the United Nations Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction and Head of UNDRR. Yang saya hormati Dr. Pramod Kumar, Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister of India, Sameh Wahba, Director of World Bank, dan saudara sekalian, all the participants yang saya hormati. I'm sorry. Pertama, marilah kita panjatkan puji syukur kepada Tuhan Yang Maha Kuasa atas segala nikmat dan karunia-Nya, sehingga kita dapat menghadiri acara 5th edition of the World Reconstruction Conference atau WRC5 pada hari ini dalam keadaan sehat walafiat. Saya mengucapkan terima kasih dan penghargaan yang setinggi-tingginya untuk EU, UNDP, World Bank, UNDRR, dan International Recovery Platform yang telah menyelenggarakan acara ini. Bapak Ibu hadirin yang berbahagia, Indonesia mendapat julukan sebagai negara laboratorium bencana karena memiliki potensi bencana yang sangat tinggi, dan untuk itu perlu terus mempelajari langkah-langkah mitigasi dan kesiapsiagaannya. Secara geografis dan geologis, Indonesia rentan bencana. Karena terletak di zona pertemuan lempeng-lempeng besar dunia, Indonesia juga perlu waspada terhadap bencana non-alam dan bencana hidrometeorologis yang dipicu perubahan iklim global. Menurut World Risk Report 2021, Indonesia berada di urutan ke-38 dari 181 negara yang berisiko bencana. Kebijakan penanggulangan bencana Indonesia selaras dengan pembangunan nasional yang tercantum di visi penanggulangan bencana dalam Rencana Induk Penanggulangan Bencana atau RIPB 2020-2044, yaitu mewujudkan Indonesia tangguh bencana untuk pembangunan berkelanjutan. Visi ini merupakan bagian prioritas pembangunan dan aksi nasional mengacu pada Rencana Pembangunan Jangka Panjang Menengah Nasional atau RPJMN yaitu 2020-2024. Hal tersebut mendorong Indonesia mencapai hasil lebih baik dalam penerapan strategi pengurangan risiko bencana sampai tingkat lokal dan memperkuat kerjasama negara-negara Asia Pasifik. Pemulihan bencana erupsi Gunung Api Semeru yang terjadi beberapa waktu yang lalu, had happened a couple months ago, salah satu contoh praktek baik dalam pemulihan pasca bencana di Indonesia, di mana dalam waktu 5 bulan progres pembangunan hunian, progres pembangunan hunian tetap, relokasi bagi masyarakat yang terdampak bencana telah mencapai 92,86% dalam waktu 5 bulan, in the time of 5 months. Kolaborasi multi pihak terjalin dengan baik antara pemerintah dan non-pemerintah guna memastikan pemenuhan kebutuhan dasar dan pemulihan sosial ekonomi masyarakat terdampak. Koordinasi multi pihak dalam pemulihan pasca bencana dapat disaksikan pula dalam Rumah Resiliensi Indonesia atau RRI yang juga merupakan bagian dari side event dari GPDRR. Hadirin sekalian yang berbahagia, yang saya hormati, pelaksanaan WRC kelima ini merupakan bagian dari preparatory meetings GPDRR yang ke-7 tahun 2022. GPDRR tahun ini menjadi penting karena menjadi bagian dari proses midterm review implementasi kerangka pengurangan risiko bencana 2030 dan juga Paris Agreement dan pembangunan berkelanjutan atau SDGs. Untuk itu saya ingin mengajak dan mendorong segenap stakeholder kebencanaan guna mencapai tujuan SFDRR dan SDGs, terutama dalam meningkatkan kerjasama internasional untuk mengurangi kerugian ekonomi akibat bencana, kerusakan infrastruktur, dan gangguan layanan dasar. Agenda Indonesia adalah menjadikan momentum penyelenggaraan WRC kelima ini agar pemulihan sosial ekonomi dapat menjadi jalur untuk upaya pembangunan ketangguhan atau resiliensi bangsa serta pemulihan dari pandemi COVID-19. Hadirin sekalian yang saya banggakan, besar harapan kami melalui forum GPDRR, khususnya kegiatan WRC5 ini akan menghasilkan beberapa capaian, di antaranya 1. Memberikan praktek baik dan rekomendasi pada pemangku kebijakan. 2. Didapatkan pesan kunci dari Joint Communique pada sesi WRC. Yang ketiga, meningkatkan kesadaran pentingnya pemulihan atau Build Back Better untuk pengurangan risiko bencana. Dan yang terakhir, yang keempat, memberikan masukan untuk midterm review SFDRR. Indonesia dapat berperan mempromosikan hasil dan produk pengetahuan dari konferensi dalam penerapan kebijakan pemulihan pasca bencana, antara lain penanganan pasca bencana erupsi Gunung Api Semeru, badai siklon tropis Seroja Provinsi Nusa Tenggara Timur, dan gempa Provinsi Sulawesi Barat. Kami mengucapkan terima kasih yang sebesar-besarnya kepada seluruh negara dan para mitra. Dan saya berharap melalui WRC yang kelima sebagai rangkaian dari GBDRR 2022 di Bali ini dapat mewujudkan dunia yang tangguh bencana dan membangun kolaborasi yang lebih erat. Demikian yang dapat saya sampaikan. Semoga kegiatan ini berjalan lancar dan memberi manfaat bagi kemajuan kita bersama. Terima kasih atas perhatiannya. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. We're very delighted to have Ms. Mami Mizuturi, the Special Representative of the United Nations Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction and Head of UNDR with us today. Ms. Mizuturi assumed her role on 1st of March 2018. She has served for 27 years in various capacities in the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and prior to joining the UN, Ms. Mizuturi was Executive Director of the Sainsbury Institute for the Study of Japanese Arts and Cultures, University of East Anglia in the UK since 2011. Ms. Mizuturi graduated in law from Hitotsubashi University, Tokyo, and obtained a diploma in international studies from the Diplomatic School of Spain. Please join me in welcoming Mami, as she is affectionately known, to offer her greetings and welcome.
Thank you very much, Ronald. Honorable Muhadir Effendi, Coordinating Minister of the Ministry for Human Development and Culture. His Excellency Dr. P.K. Mishra, Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister of India, fellow panelists, dear Asako, dear Samay, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. I am excited, encouraged, very pleased to be here with you for the 5th World Reconstruction Conference co-organized by UNDP, the World Bank, and UNDRR under the umbrella of the International Recovery Platform. For the last 2 years, countries around the world have fought to save lives from a relentless pandemic while continuing to face the consequence of our changing climate and all other natural and human-induced hazards. Throughout this time, leaders have faced the unprecedented challenge of managing an ongoing simultaneous process of response and recovery from a global crisis with a very uncertain ending. Every country, every sector, and virtually every person has been impacted, but none more so than the most poorest and most vulnerable. We are meeting, as everyone has already said, at a very critical juncture for the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals and of course the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. Both of these frameworks are approaching the midpoint of their implementation at a time of significant setbacks incurred not only from the global pandemic, but also from other disasters and conflict and their downstream impacts on global hunger and poverty, to name just a few. As countries conduct their midterm reviews of the implementation of the Sendai Framework, we have a crucial opportunity to reflect upon what we have achieved and where we have fallen short, and what we have learned over the first 7 years of the implementation of the framework. We also have an opportunity to form a vision for reducing disaster risk and building back better, or as some people say, building forward better, in light of our changed and changing world. How we recover from the setbacks of the last 2 years will determine whether we can meet the ambitions of the Sustainable Development Goals and the Sendai Framework. And there has never been a more urgent need to recover than that of our present time. Although resources for recovery are already under a lot of strain, we must restore what was lost, and we must set forth new pathways for development. We must ensure that new infrastructure works to reduce risk, do not create or increase risk, if we are to stop the spiral of disaster destruction. That is why we need to use this conference to learn from one another on how to understand better the nature of systemic risk and the concurrent and cascading impacts of disasters. We will work together to use this recovery process to build back better by resetting development pathways towards a greener, more resilient, and of course more equitable societies. And we will rethink how we plan and manage recovery from complex and interconnected crises in a post-COVID world. Within each of these objectives, we will tackle many of the emerging and persistent challenges for recovery. These include infrastructure resilience, urbanization, financing, governance, greening, meeting the needs of the most vulnerable groups, and of course, planning and preparing for recovery before disaster strikes. So I look forward to engaging with and learning from all of you, and to building on the lessons and outcomes of this conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mami. We now turn our attention virtually to a keynote from Dr. Mishra. And Dr. Pramod Kumar Mishra, as you would have heard before, is the Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister of India. He has varied work experience in the management of programs related to agriculture, disaster management, energy, infrastructure, financing, regulatory issues, and has an outstanding career profile comprising research, publications, policy formulation, programming, and project management. As Secretary, Agriculture and Cooperation, he was actively involved in the path-breaking national initiatives such as the National Agriculture Development Program and the National Food Security Mission. Dr. Mishra has a PhD in Economics Development Studies from the University of Sussex, an MA in Development Economics from the University of Sussex, and also a Master of Arts in Economics at the Delhi School of Economics, and a Bachelor of Arts in Economics from Sambalpur University. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Mishra, who will be speaking to us virtually. Go ahead, Dr. Mishra. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Ronald Jackson, for a very generous introduction. Honorable Minister Mohadir Effendi, Ms. Mami Bijuthori, Special Representative of the United Nations Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction, Ms. Asako Okai from UNDP, Mr. Sameh Wahaba from the World Bank, friends and colleagues from across the world. I am sorry I am not able to be present in person, which would have given an opportunity to interact with all of you much more. Yet, the post-COVID world has encouraged us to interact virtually when it is not feasible to have in-person interaction. It is immensely significant that Government of Indonesia is hosting the 5th World Reconstruction Conference. Almost 2 decades ago, Indonesia bore the brunt of the Indian Ocean tsunami. However, after the tsunami, Indonesia set new benchmarks for recovery and exemplified Build Back Better in a way it improved the lives and livelihoods of its people. It has institutionalized the practice of post-disaster needs assessment and developed innovative matrices such as Disaster Recovery Index. Building on the experience of recovery after the Indian Ocean tsunami and many other major disasters, the practice of post-disaster recovery has come a long way. If we codify the lessons from the past recovery programs, they will all come in handy for dealing with the impact of increasing incidents of climate-induced disasters. Today, I would like to underline 5 main points that must underpin the practice of post-disaster reconstruction and recovery. First, Build Back Better must focus on better outcomes and not merely on better inputs. The practice of post-disaster needs assessment that goes beyond assessment of damages and losses provides us the necessary building blocks to focus on outcomes. We must look at the combined outcome of reconstruction in different sectors such as housing, health, education, and transportation for the lives and livelihood of affected people. We need to go beyond recovery at the household level to recovery at the community level. The COVID-19 pandemic has added, as Ms. Mami Mijutori mentioned very eloquently, a new dimension to our approach to recovery, greater focus on livelihood, poverty, and inequality. How can this happen? This leads me to my second point, putting agency in the hands of the affected people. In India, since the Gujarat earthquake of 2001, the practice of owner-driven reconstruction or ODR has evolved, and we have seen how it leads to better overall outcomes. We have applied and refined these methods in subsequent reconstruction programs, including in Nepal. It has become clear that translating the rhetoric of ODR approaches to reality requires significant socio-technical facilitation. It does not happen automatically. We need to develop a vibrant global community of practice that continuously nurtures methods of owner-driven reconstruction. How can such a community practice be nurtured? This leads me to my third point. We need to have predictable mechanisms, financial, institutional, and technical, at all levels for supporting post-disaster recovery and reconstruction. In India, for the first time in the country's disaster risk management financing architectures, we have created a specific window for financing reconstruction and recovery with US $7.5 billion over 5 years. However, dedicated finance by itself is not enough. It needs to be supported by appropriate institutional structures, standards and norms, and of course, capacities. We need to painstakingly develop these systems to make the most effective use of these resources. This conference is an opportunity to share good practices for building such solutions. My fourth point is a corollary of my first, where I talked about focus on outcomes. We need to focus on outcomes not just over the short term, but also the long term. Recovery and reconstruction programs supported by take 4 to 6 years. However, actual recovery on the ground takes almost half a generation. While there are many short-term outcome evaluations of recovery and reconstruction programs, there are fewer longitudinal studies. It is important that we establish some sort of global, regional, or national observatory of reconstruction programs that captures the long-term outcomes of recovery and reconstruction programs. Finally, I would like to say something about new technologies. In the context of challenges in reconstruction and recovery, we often use the term tyranny of rush, balancing the demand for quick recovery with build back better is always very difficult. However, new technologies, for example, drones, geospatial technologies, sensing technologies can help accelerate the recovery process by expediting assessments, beneficiary identification, and tracking the progress of recovery and reconstruction. We need to make the most of the promise of technology. In conclusion, I would like to say that if we move beyond preparedness for response to preparedness for recovery. It will be a big step towards building societal resilience. This will be key for tackling the emerging impacts of climate change. In India, we have managed several large recovery and reconstruction programs. We will be happy to share what we have learned from these programs with the international community. At the same time, we would like to use global experience to improve our own systems, processes, and policies. I wish you all a very fruitful conference. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mishra. Your entreats are well noted. I know I'm also pleased to introduce one of our other wonderful partners who've worked with us over the many years in convening this event, Sami Waba, the director of the World Bank. He's an Egyptian national, and he's the global director for World Bank's Urban Disaster Risk Management, Resilience, and Local Global Practice based in Washington, D.C. Prior to joining the World Bank in 2004, he worked at the Institute of Housing and Urban Development Studies in Rotterdam and at the Harvard Center for Urban Development Studies. Mr. Waba holds a PhD and a master's degree in urban planning from Harvard University and a BSc and an MSc in architectural engineering from Cairo University. He speaks Arabic, French, English, and Portuguese. Sami, I'm happy to know that we're from the same school, the School of Urban Planning. Welcome. I offer the podium to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Ron. And thanks to Ms. Asako Okai, Assistant Administrator of UNDP and the Director of the Crisis Bureau. Thanks to Ms. Mami Mizutori, the Special Representative of the Secretary General of the United Nations for Disaster Risk Reduction, for the sponsorship, together with the World Bank Group, of this get-together in the World Reconstruction Conference, for the role of UNDP and UNDRR. A special thanks as well to the Honorable Minister Bapak Muhajir Effendi, the Coordinating Minister of the Ministry of Human Development and Culture, and for the Government of Indonesia for hosting us and the World Reconstruction Conference for the first time in the Global South. Also want to thank His Excellency Dr. Pramod Kumar Mishra, Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister of India, for his inspiring remark. And drawn by what Dr. Mishra shared with us, I wanted to share with you a few thoughts about how we can make the 5th World Reconstruction Conference a success and to take this thinking into the global platform for disaster risk reduction. Now, since we last met for the 4th World Reconstruction Conference in Geneva in 2019, COVID-19 has transformed the world. So in addition to the loss of millions of lives, the pandemic has had severe socio-economic consequences. Now, in the short term, economic activities stalled, and this contributed to the greatest global economic downturn in a century. Now, in the longer term, the pandemic's socio-economic consequences are likely to outlast the pandemic itself, particularly in terms of its impact on the most vulnerable and disadvantaged groups who have suffered disproportionately from the impacts of the pandemic. And the pandemic also threatens to unravel decades of development progress and to derail the global prospects for achieving the Sustainable Development Goal by 2030. In fact, 2020 was the first reversal in humanity's progress on poverty alleviation for over 2 decades. Now, the international community faces an era of unprecedented multiplicity and complexity of crises. In addition to the pandemic, we've got natural disasters, climate change, rapid environmental degradation, armed conflict, intensification of violence, forced displacement, migration, radicalization, and terrorism. So this complexity in the context of COVID-19 calls for a rethink of how recovery is planned, financed, and managed in order to protect socio-economic gains, build resilience, and contribute to sustainable development. Now, we all know the value of investing in resilient recovery. We know that resilient infrastructure investments have a present value return of $4 for each $1 invested. And we know that when countries rebuild infrastructure after disasters to be more resilient, they can reduce the negative impacts of future disasters on livelihoods and well-being by as much as 31%. And meanwhile, universal access to early warning systems can reduce asset and well-being losses from disasters by an estimated $35 billion per year. And yet, barely 6.5% of total official development assistance for disasters was directed to disaster risk management from 2010 to 2019. And this is due, obviously, to a variety of reasons, including countries lacking sufficient resources to invest in disaster risk reduction, limited knowledge of disaster risks and the vulnerabilities. So what do we need to do differently to build resilience, protect development gains, and promote sustainable development through recovery? So let me challenge us to think about the following questions as we deliberate in these next 2 days. The first is, how have recovery challenges and opportunities changed over these last 2 to 3 years since the 4th World Reconstruction Conference with the advent of COVID-19 and the increased complexity? Second, what have we learned from implementing frameworks for recovery from the socio-economic devastation that was wrought to us by the pandemic? Third, how well have existing governance models for disaster recovery performed in complex crises during COVID-19? And fourth, what do we as international partners need to do better and differently to support recovery that protects development gains for all and enhances resilience? So to the extent that we can answer these questions by sharing lessons, good practices, and innovative solutions, we will be able to achieve the promise of this conference. That is, to reconstruct for a sustainable future and build resilience through recovery in a COVID-19 transformed world. Thank you very much. Terima kasih.
Thank you very much, Sir Sammy. Now, we've come to the end of the opening ceremony, but before we close, I think it is important that we reflect a little bit on some of the key messages that flowed through all of the notes of the speakers and the entreats. We heard about the issues around sustainability given the COVID-19 setback, and we've been challenged to really redefine or define sustainability given the challenges that we now face. We've heard about the need for us to have increased resolve in addressing the challenge of protecting the development gains and picking up the momentum towards the sustainable development goals and bringing forward a sustainable future. We've heard a call for collective action and rethinking of approaches. These are very important challenges. We've heard important terms such as collaboration, innovation, transformation, resilience, green, and most important, inclusive. We've heard the call for us to enhance our capacities and work through South-South, enhancing national capacities and leveraging these through South-South cooperation for building the resilience of the Asia-Pacific region. The opportunity provided by the midterm review of the Sendai framework to engage not in an event-centric conversation, but a risk-based development discourse. We've heard some very important questions outlined by Sami, and I won't repeat them. I think we need to keep them in the forefront of our minds, not just for the events over the next 2 days, but as we go into the global platform. And from Dr. Mishra, the tyranny of the urgent, really challenging us to move towards a balance of matching demand with our ambitions of building a resilient pathway forward. And more importantly, the need for us to look at outcomes, and not short-term outcomes, but more importantly, medium to long-term development outcomes. Development is not a short game, it's a long game. So we have to look, as we work through the recovery process, at the longer-term endeavor. And again, more importantly, building community-level ownership and capacity for resilience. There are so many different messages. I could enumerate several more, but we're out of time. And I want to add my voice of thanks to all of the speakers, high-level speakers who welcomed us and gave us remarks on behalf of their respective organizations. But before we go, 2 things. One, it is my pleasure to officially launch the World Reconstruction Forum 5. And I'm encouraging you to participate wholly in all of the plenaries. And as I said, let your voice be heard, and your voice is also the voice of the people. Thank you very much for joining us.